You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. The Manitoba Chamber Orchestra opens their 50th anniversary season by welcoming a pair of spectacular sibling soloists. Sisters Yolanda and Carmen Bruno have each established themselves as individual, dynamic, and versatile players who together will share the Westminster stage in Winnipeg, performing music of Antonio Vivaldi and Canadian Charles Cousins. I'm excited to say that the sisters have joined me virtually this morning for a conversation. Welcome to Winnipeg's Classic 107.
Thanks for having us.
A pleasure to have you here. And welcome to Winnipeg. I know you've both toured plenty as soloists, chamber musicians, orchestral players around the continent and Europe. But remind me, have you been to Winnipeg before?
I have not. Well, I was in the airport once, but I don't think that counts. And neither have I. It's both of our first times here. And it's beautiful at the beginning of fall. It's wonderful to be here in September. It's gorgeous.
Well, I'm so glad that you've finally made it. I'm so curious, how did you manage to avoid us for so long? It seems like such an outlier.
I've been wondering the same thing. I'm not sure how that happened. So what an honor to be here. And also we'll be here for the MCO's Manitoba Chamber Orchestra's 50th anniversary season. So that's also really remarkable.
A 50th anniversary season that you get to kick off, and we're going to be chatting more about that concert. But before we get to that, let's chat a little bit more about each of your musical journeys. Yolanda, you're the elder sibling, a violinist following in your mother's footsteps, who, as I learned from your bio, introduced you to music right from your earliest days, pretty much born with a violin in hand. Can you tell us that story?
You're right. That's kind of a crazy story. So my mom actually went into labor, I think, at a performance, pregnant with me. So I definitely was hearing music well before I was actually born. And so that's been part of my journey and my mom's as well.
That is such a wild story. It really, really is. Following studies at McGill and Guildhall in London, you returned to Canada. You joined the Toronto Symphony Orchestra in 2019, plus plenty of other musical adventures, as you put them. You really believe in the communicative and connective power of music, don't you?
I really do. And thanks for bringing that up. I feel that music is a wonderful vehicle to communicate with people and in a way more abstract. So someone else can have a different experience than I do in a way that sort of words can be sometimes limiting. And so I look for opportunities to find ways to create intimacy in sharing music. And maybe you're alluding to a project I did during the pandemic called Music for Your Blues, which was an online series. Anybody could sign up. It was free. And I would offer 30-minute short performances that were one-on-one and would share music and stories in that way in a very intimate fashion. So I do love music and community and finding the ways that those two things can come together.
And you've done exactly that. Carmen, unlike your sister beside you and unlike your mom, you perform on the cello. How did you go about getting the different instrument? I have to ask.
Well, there was a bit of negotiation involved. I'm pretty sure my mom was not at a performance when she went in labor with me. I think she was on a walk. So no. I started on violin, not by choice, but because it was, mandatory. And I don't know why I wanted to play the cello. I don't know where I even heard of what that was. But my mom said that if I stuck with violin for 6 months, then I was allowed to make the career change. Yeah, so that's how that.
And that change has led you to a great career. You went on to study in the Netherlands. You both hold Dutch passports. Your mom is Dutch. Then you returned to Canada for further studies at McGill, where you're currently pursuing a doctoral degree, studying with a fellow who was just in the Classic 107 studio last month, Matt Imovitz, which is really cool. I mean, these are the connections in the classical music world. It is not as big as we think it is, isn't it?
Yeah, no, Matt's great.
Yeah, he really is great. And one of those fellows who can really just play anything that comes his way. He was in town for a Summer Music Academy Rosamunde here in Winnipeg. You're also a member of the Quebec Symphony Orchestra. It sounds like you two have plenty of musical adventures going on. Does that sound about right, Carmen?
Yeah, we've done all sorts of different kinds of projects. Some recording projects, which we've done together once. Lots of chamber music over the years. Did youth orchestra tours when we were a little younger, done all sorts of fun stuff.
So given how busy you both are now, how often do you get the chance to perform together these days?
That's a very good question. So since the pandemic, actually not even since the pandemic. Carmen lives in Quebec City and I live in Toronto. So that just geographically has made certain things trickier. We do sometimes meet up in Ottawa to play. Our family are from Ottawa. So whenever we get the opportunity to work together there, we both come and meet there. But yeah, things, it's so interesting. Once you kind of go to a different city, things get trickier. So this is a really special coming together for us, to come together and take a week off of our respective work that we do in Quebec City and Toronto and come together here in Winnipeg and play this solo with the orchestra.
Yeah, it's actually the first time we've played together or performed together since we both moved for our jobs, because we got our jobs in these two orchestras at the exact same time. And we were in Montreal together before that, so we kind of
there was that little bit of overlap, right, in Montreal. But if we can go even further back to Ottawa, your early years in the home, did you play music together often then? Were there a lot of duets happening, trios, anything like that?
We did play together a lot then. So in those early years, it was a combination of a few things. One was like learning the instruments. Obviously, as young kids and teenagers, we are going to youth orchestra and chamber music programs together, and we're playing together in kind of educational contexts. But we also played together a lot at weddings for like probably a good 5 to 8 years. We were working in the summers, playing at tons of weddings. And then off we both go to university in Europe. And then when we both came back to Canada around 2016, 2017, we started playing duels together, all kinds of kind of cool contemporary music, some old music that we arranged for violin and cello. And then one of our special projects was commissioning a new duel by Canadian composer Kelly Mary Murphy. That was a great CD. We recorded that on an album called The Wild Swans. It's an amazing work. And so we did a bunch of stuff before, you're right, 2019, when we both kind of went to different cities further apart. And that's our journey so far.
Yeah, and what a journey it has been, a journey that has now brought you to Winnipeg for the very first time, which I still can't get over. That's almost mind-blowing to me, but very happy that you're here to kick off the MCO's 50th anniversary season. And there's something so special about sibling performances. I've been in the audience before when there's been featured sibling soloists, and that connection, it is so clear. It's almost like this magical quality. It's like all those years performing music together, it just serves you so well once you get up on the stage. And whether it's been, I'm sure, weeks or months, or in this case, years since you really had the opportunity to share the stage, it must all just wash away when you get up and perform together again on stage, right?
Yeah, I don't think I ever told you this, but I've described Yolanda to friends as my musical soulmate. Yeah. We have it's interesting because we didn't ever study in the same school at the same time or anything, and we had different teachers, but we have very similar tastes. Maybe that somehow comes from how we grew up. I'm not totally sure, because I feel like a lot of that developed afterwards. But yeah, I really enjoy each other's playing, and obviously there's a lot of shorthand with siblings too, so it's easier to communicate. Or maybe harder, I guess it can be. But I think for us, it's easy to communicate in a work environment. So yeah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say we both have a kind of unique background or interest in Baroque music. And find one cool thing about the way we interpret, we're playing a Vivaldi Concerto this week, tomorrow, but also the way we generally look at music in general. We have similar tastes in like the quality of sound and the kind of performance we aspire to deliver.
Yeah.
So I find in that way, like we save so much time when we rehearse and when we work together, because things just kind of fit in the way that, you don't have to dissect everything. It's just like, oh yeah, we're speaking that same language.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the Vivaldi that's on the program, RV 547. This is, it's a Vivaldi concerto. The man certainly knew how to write a concerto. He wrote plenty of them, but this is one of those that really showcases each of your individual talents. You really get to show your chops, don't you?
Yeah, you do. Vivaldi, in my mind, is like the rock composer of like the Baroque era. It's totally one of those. It's just like you're just gonna like it right away. It's great. It's exciting. It's upbeat. He just knows how to write for the instruments. And so it is fun, and it does showcase things together. It's really fun. Like Carmen will do something and then I respond right after and like join in on the line she's doing, or vice versa. And the orchestra kind of like jump in all together sometimes and create this really big raw energy. So it's a great piece. Yeah. And you're right, he wrote like hundreds, I think hundreds of concerti. So he just, this is just like one he probably wrote on a weekend, no big deal.
Yeah, just tossed off, no big deal. It's just another day in the life. You mentioned sort of like that rock star energy of Vivaldi, which is a great way of putting it. I'm going to start saying that now. Vivaldi, you're just going to like it. It should be a bumper sticker or something. But
yes.
But when I think about that, I think about the energy that's there, and then as siblings, is there any sort of like almost like a rivalry when you get up on stage? I mean, like there is that sort of age-old trope, right, of the sibling rivalry. Does it feel like that when you get up, Carmen, and you're there with your cello and you look over at your sister on her violin? Do you kind of think like, okay, that's great, but let me turn it up a notch here?
Well, I mean, with the Vivaldi especially, it's really easy to do that because I think most of the time Yolanda has a figure that she introduces and then I respond with something that's maybe harmonically different, but the material is kind of the same. So there is definitely the feeling that you need to at least match that person, and if not, exceed it a little bit, because if you're below it, then it's a little embarrassing.
Yeah, no, well said. I think that rivalry can go a long way, and maybe rivalry is the wrong word, but it's just that energy that you match from your sibling who's beside you. There's also music of Canadian Charles Cousins, which I have to say I find a little bit ironic. I find it a fun bit of wordplay that sisters are performing music of cousins. I just find that really humorous.
Oh.
But with that aside, thank you for the finger guns there. I do want to talk a little bit about the music itself. The Elegy of the Swan and the Lark, taking inspiration from our natural environment and especially Lake Country in Northern Ontario. Originally, the Lark played by the flute. It's been rearranged for violin, played by you, Yolanda, and then cello serves as our swan, of course. Could you tell us a little bit more about this particular piece of music?
Absolutely. So we found this piece because we were looking for something specifically for violin and cello, a double concerto for string orchestra written by a Canadian. And the repertoire for like solo cello and string orchestra and solo violin is abundant, but to find that duet was tricky. Then we approached Charles, and this beautiful work comes up that I believe he commissioned he wrote about 15 years ago. And it's supposed to set a scene on a lake in Ontario. It's kind of moody the way it starts. And then Carmen comes in with this beautiful solo, like the swan emerging onto the water. And then later I am the lark. And then both of our animals kind of come together in this conversation. And then we again drift off and go separate ways. And we're returning to this beautiful, serene lake. And it's just any music that is inspired by nature. It just feels right. It feels right for the instruments and being Canadian and that kind of conversation.
Yeah, the swan and the lark coming together and then going off in their separate ways is kind of like Yolanda and I coming together in Winnipeg and then going back home afterwards to our respective cities.
How beautiful. How perfect. I mean, I don't think we could have scripted this one any better. Some great programming here. Yolanda, Carmen, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me at Classic 107 today. A pleasure finally having you here in Winnipeg to kick off the MCO's 50th anniversary year. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Simon. We look forward to playing tomorrow night. And also, we'll be back in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Oh, can't wait. So 2 opportunities for you to see Yolanda and Carmen perform. There is a matinee at 1 and then a full concert beginning at 7:30, both concerts at Westminster United Church.